Compulsory attendance laws were passed by states throughout the 1800s. However, students with disabilities were excluded from these laws. In 1893, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled that a student who was weak in mind or was unable to take ordinary, decent physical care of himself could be expelled from public schools. Many similar court rulings followed. By the late 1960s to early 1970s, most states had passed laws requiring schools to educate students with special needs. However, the states' laws were uneven, or they struggled with the lack of funds. In 1975, President Gerald Ford signed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975, which was a significant turning point for special education. This act would not be possible without prior cases in the civil rights movement. Brown v. Board of Education sought to provide great constitutional protection for minorities and eventually individuals with disabilities. This case emphasized equal protection under the law found in the 14th Amendment. This significantly changed the government's approach to education of students with disabilities. As the article, The Legal History of Special Education, states, there were two key elements in the argument. First, they pointed out that there was an unacceptable level of differential treatment within the class of children with disabilities. Second, they argued that some students with disabilities were not furnished with an education, whereas all students without disabilities were provided an education. Parents of children with disabilities led the way for changes in special education. The White House Conference of 1910 increased education of students with special needs in public schools, rather than institutionalizing them. However, many students with disabilities remained unidentified. Due to many factors, the conditions of the new special education classrooms eventually became almost as bad as the institutions in the past. To promote change, many advocacy groups were organized. These groups include the National Association for Retarded Citizens, the Council for Exceptional Children, the Association for Persons with Severe Handicaps, and the National Association for Down Syndrome. Additionally, the Brown v. Board of Education case led the way for the equal opportunity movement for individuals with disabilities. There were two more cases that contributed to this: the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Citizens versus Pennsylvania, and Mills v. Board of Education. These cases, and many more, proved that federal involvement was necessary for change. Early federal involvement included the passage of the Expansion of Teaching in the Education of Mentally Retarded Children Act of 1958, the National Defense Education Act of 1958, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. When President Clinton signed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, he summarized that individuals with disabilities have made a lot of progress, in large part due to parental involvement and advocacy groups. To summarize, in the past, individuals who engage in society differently were excluded from the full benefits of society and equal protection under the law. After tireless work from parents and advocacy groups, society's mentality on individuals with disabilities finally started to shift. However, there's still much more to go for full inclusion of all individuals in society.